Good evening and welcome to this edition of Bottomline Africa. Taking you through the show today is me, Akisa Wandera, and this is the final day of November. There has been a beehive of activity across the continent, starting from the political protest against the governments of Togo and the DRC to the emotional send-off of victims of alleged police brutality here in Kenya. On a hopeful note, world attention is now focused on the enslavement of African migrants in Libya. All this and much more here on Bottomline Africa, but first, a quick look at Africa in 60 minutes. Former members of parliament and political leaders keen among those presented for vetting to the East African Legislative Assembly. Leaders from both Africa and Europe draw up an urgent evacuation plan for the migrants who have been a target of slave market auctions in Libya. Thousands pour out on the streets of Lome as protesters renew their demand for the end of the 50-year Nasimbe dynasty. And we'll tell you why plastics manufacturers are not letting go nearly 4 months after the Kenyan government imposed a ban. Well, that is Africa in 60 seconds and not 60 minutes. 60 minutes will be the whole show tonight, being the last show as we get into the month of December. Tonight, our focus, we turn it to the politics of the plastic bags in the country and the ban that has been on for 4 months. We'll be looking at just how far the implementation has come and, of course, some of the politics surrounding it. The Kenya Association of Manufacturers still has a case in court challenging this, and let me just introduce my guest tonight for this very as we will be taking a look at this conversation and some of the critical dynamics of it. Samuel Matonda is a plastics sector head at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, joining us tonight here on Bottomline Africa. Salome Machua is the Deputy Director General of NEMA, as well as Eddie Orinda, who's a lawyer very actively involved in a case surrounding the ban of plastic bags in the country. And of course, you are here watching us from home. Would love to engage with you as you just pick your mind and what you think about this whole story. So our Twitter poll question tonight is, how has your life changed since the ban on plastics? Has your life changed since the ban on plastics? You can find us at KTN News on Twitter, at Akisa Wandera. The hashtag to use is Bottomline Africa. I can see a number of tweets already. I will be taking a look at them at some point in the broadcast tonight. So we begin from right here in Kenya, where both political coalitions finally submitted their nominees for the position of Member of Parliament at the East African Legislative Assembly. The final list of nominees to EALA, former chairman of the Constitution Implementation Commission, Charles Nyichae, and former clerk of the National Assembly, Justin Bundi, are on the Jubilee list and will compete for the 5 slots reserved for the party. Raila Odinga's elder brother, Oburu Odinga, and Kennedy Musyoka, who is the son of Wiper Party leader Kalonzo Musyoka, will compete with the other 10 nominees for the 4 slots reserved for the opposition. Kenya's parliament is rushing against time to submit the names of its 9 members to the East African Legislative Assembly. The process was to be concluded by the 11th parliament before Kenyans went to the polls in August.
Wrangling over the party list between Jubilee and the opposition code delayed the process.
An urgent evacuation plan has been devised for migrants facing abuse in Libyan detention camps. It was drawn up at an African Union-European Union summit in Ivory Coast. Libya's United Nations-backed administration joined the agreement, but has only limited control over the territory, raising questions about how it will work in practice. Now, the migrants will be sent mainly back to their home countries. The move follows the publication of video footage that appeared to show migrants from Sub-Saharan Africa being sold in Libya as slaves. French President Emmanuel Macron called the slave auctions a crime against humanity. Hundreds of thousands of migrants have crossed the Sahara and the Mediterranean trying to reach Europe. Thousands die on the journey, and those who make it arrive in Libya virtually penniless, making them vulnerable to modern-day slave trade.
We took firm decisions on the immediate evacuation of refugees, setting up a committee led by the African Union's Commission on Human Rights, a seat held by the European Union, pursuing smugglers of human beings. And we consider this smuggling a crime.
Nous avons exprimé combien le traitement inhumain.
We express the extent to which inhuman treatment of migrants makes us stop and think and requires a reason equal to our condemnation. And without delay, there must quickly be humanitarian action to tackle networks of smugglers. They must be put out of harm's way, and investigation must be carried out to identify those responsible.
Afin de situer les responsabilités.
Elle a visité un camp.
She visited a camp just in Tripoli, where there are 3,800 African migrants, mostly from West Africa countries, including women and children, who are in an inhumane situation. They want to get out of this mess as swift
sortir de ces guépis.
Now, the 5th African Union-European Union Summit in Abidjan was keen to limit the flow of migrants to Europe by introducing tighter checks and controls on African soil, not in Europe. Fresh reports of abuses against African migrants in Libya, reported by CNN, have sparked anger across the continent, outrage that lent urgency to talks on migration as the European Union leaders met their African Union counterparts in Ivory Coast. 161 Ivorian migrants who returned home from Libya last week after being stranded there and recounted their harrowing experience after leaving home in search of a better life in Europe.
We lived in a transit camp in Libya, and it was not a pleasant situation. I spent 2 months there in a camp in Tripoli, and there is where I understood that Europeans are the ones complicating things. They are the reason that we are not going back. That's why I want to come and understand this. I have Ivorian brothers and sisters who are still living there. When you see them coming back home, they build homes and have money. When you look at what and look at the house you live in, which is barely a house in a poor neighborhood, you tell yourself that you can also go abroad and live like them. And that's why I left for Europe. We need to ask Europeans to help us. White people need to give money to African leaders so that they can help us, and then we won't need to go anywhere. As long as they don't give us money, even if the ocean was made out of electricity, we will continue to go there because we are struggling here.
Separately, at least 250 Cameroonians returned home from Libya days after media reports of migrants being traded as slaves in Libya sent shockwaves through sub-Saharan Africa and angered the world. Many of those who returned to the Cameroon capital, Yaoundé, included men and children who, like many migrants, end up in Libya as they attempt the voyage across the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean Sea to European shores. Faced with poverty and unemployment, many left to seek a better life abroad, but have returned with dashed dreams and harrowing tales of abuse, being captured by traffickers and traded like livestock by their captors.
I was in Algeria. In Algeria, I assure you that my brother and sisters are dying there. Especially me. I was left in the desert. I spent 7 days in the desert. A woman we were with died in the desert, and it really hurt me. That's why I decided to go back to my native land. We were in Libya. In Algeria, we did all the Maghreb. Yes, always looking for the road to Europe. We've seen so many things, so many things. Many people who died in the waters, others who died in the desert. It's pitiful. It's really pitiful.
Now, Togo's opposition on Wednesday vowed to maintain the momentum of anti-government protests as thousands again took to the streets before promised talks with the president. The leader of the National Alliance for Change party, Jean-Pierre Fabre, led the crowds in the capital, but similar protests were banned on security grounds in the north. Many young people who had fled into the countryside fearing repercussions had not yet returned home. Wednesday's march was the first of 3 planned for this week to put pressure on Togo's President Faure Gnassingbe to resign. Gnassingbe has been president of the West African nation since 2005, taking over after the death of his father, General Gnassingbe Eyadema, who ruled Togo for 38 years.
Europe and France must work for the liberation of Togo. If not, the Togolese people will fight for it themselves. Emmanuel Macron has nothing to do with Togo. He doesn't even know the place. At the heart of the matter, there is, for example, the return of the Constitution of 1992, the departure of the head of states, etc. Those are the subjects the dialogue will deal with.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, police fired tear gas to disperse demonstrators in several Congolese cities as they gathered for a major opposition protest to demand that President Joseph Kabila step down. Opposition figures had vowed to push ahead with the demonstrations despite a ban as tensions soar over Kabila's refusal to step down at the end of his term in December 2016. In power since 2001, Kabila's prolonged rule has already led to street protests and a bloody crackdown. Elections had been due to take place by the end of 2017 under a deal with the opposition aimed at avoiding bloodshed, but the date has since been pushed back until December 2018, further heightening tensions. In Kinshasa, police fired tear gas to disperse about 100 supporters outside the home of opposition coalition head.
We are participating in a march of anger. A march of anger, we say to Kabila. No, never again. We suffer, and especially our mothers. The crisis has even entered their kitchens. It is serious. Today, the Congolese will no longer tolerate the nonsense of Kabila and his acolytes.
Fidelis Mukonori, the Jesuit priest who mediated Robert Mugabe's exit in what was a seismic moment in Zimbabwe's history, says the 93-year-old appeared relieved after signing his resignation letter. It was the culmination of a chaotic fortnight which began when Mugabe fired his deputy Emmerson Mnangagwa, prompting a military takeover and mass street protest which eventually forced him out, ending a 37-year reign that will best be remembered for its economic ruin. The resignation letter, which was read out in Parliament on November 21st, was the first of days of mounting pressure and back-and-forth negotiations with the military generals, which were chaired by Mukonori. Close to Mugabe for decades, Mukonori has been involved in mediating nearly all defining conflicts of Zimbabwean politics.
He looked at it, read it through, and just gracefully took his pen and signed. And as soon as he finished the signature, the face just glowed. Really a sign of saying it's done.
Civil war in South Sudan is generating unseen levels of domestic violence, rather, according to a study released showing a reported increase in the brutality and frequency of assaults. Tens of thousands of people have been killed, and a third of the East African country's 12 million residents have been forced to flee since civil war broke out in 2013. More than half of the South Sudanese women interviewed said they have suffered domestic abuse in their lives, according to the study by George Washington University and the International Rescue Committee. But in wartime, the assaults have grown more brutal and frequent, they told researchers. Most of the victims pointed to their husbands or partners as the culprits, while a third said they had suffered violence as part of warfare, such as during raids or in refugee camps.
In the family also, we see the men now have become very aggressive because of the war, so they do not even defend the rights of the women. They opened fire on us, so we prayed to God, and no one was injured.
Moving on, modern dance took center stage at the Kigali Dance Festival in Rwanda. While the art is growing rapidly in Africa, it is still mainly practiced by men. This year's festival is paying tribute to women, a way to change the prejudice that women who dance are of bad virtue. Founded in 2012, the festival serves as a platform for regional integration and capacity building, as well as a tool for peace and tolerance through dance performances.
stance teaches what I think. That's my stance. And
I realized when I was traveling in West Africa and going abroad in Europe, too, that there was lots of talent here in East Africa. But that there weren't many platforms. There were maybe 2 or 3 that existed in Uganda and Tanzania. But in east towards Rwanda, Congo, Burundi or Congo, nothing existed. And I really wanted to give an opportunity to these young people and all these artists in the region, to give them a voice and to hear their stories. The challenges are mainly in their culture. It is more cultural than financial. We know very well that women here in Africa, when they get married, they can't be on stage because it's frowned upon, and a woman is meant to stay at home, not be outside. And we know that to be an artist means going on stage and taking center stage and showing yourself, so it's really a cultural challenge.
All right, I want us to take a short break. Coming back, we get back with a conversation on the ban of plastic bags and the politics surrounding it. Still 4 months after that ban came into effect here in the country. I will reintroduce my guest tonight. Samuel Matonda is from the plastic sector. He's a plastic sector head of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Salome Machua is the Deputy Director General at NEMA, and Eddie Orinda is a lawyer. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more here on Bottomline Africa.